Stress. If I was to ask you right now, if you're honest with yourself, what your stress level is, I bet you it's pretty high. And you're not alone. Everybody is going through it. You, me, everyone, and everybody talks about it as well, but we don't know what to do about it. And now that we're rolling right into Mother's Day weekend around that time of the year, I thought it's a perfect time to talk about this, what to do about all this stress, because I got to be honest with you. I think the most stressed out, burned out people I know are moms. I see it in my personal life with the lady I'm married to, the mom of my two kids. And I think that's because they try to be all things to all people. But just hear me out. What if there was a way? What if there was a way to turn all this stress into a power? What if you were able to harness this and master it and use it creatively, right? Use it to get your passion back. Remember that? Well, the guy that's tapped into this and who I think, in my opinion, has figured it all out is Dr. Steven Sideroff. He's an acclaimed psychologist. He's at UCLA. He's a speaker, and he's the author of what we're going to get to here, The 9 Pillars of Resilience, the proven path to mastering stress, slow aging, and increased vitality. With all that said, Dr. Sideroff, thanks for being here. I appreciate your time so much.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, Bill. Thank you for inviting me.
We got to start with the obvious, which is beyond obvious. Everybody talks about it. Everybody talks about stress. I'm so stressed. I'm so burned out. It's such a common theme, and nobody needs to explain that to you. But nobody ever talks about what to do with all of this. You know, we build it up inside until we die someday. That can't be the way, and I know that's why you're on this life mission.
Yes. And, it's interesting that stress has gotten a bad name, and for good reason, because it speed up aging. It does create and contribute to all kinds of diseases, burnout.
Sure.
But the problem is that stress can also be good. In fact, if you think about all the successes in your life, I guarantee all of them have been associated with stress.
That's a good point.
Any of the good things that have happened in your life come about because you're motivated, you're driven to achieve success, achieve your goals, and all of that is accompanied by stress. So the problem is that in our brains, we've unconsciously put these two things together, stress, success. So we actually are biased toward finding stress in our lives. Now, that's the key, is that we can't just say stress is bad, but we all have to find our stress sweet spot. Okay? So there's a certain amount of stress that's good, but then when you push it beyond that level, that's when we all get into trouble. And so we want to make sure people realize that stress is okay as long as you maintain it in that sweet spot. But most of us go well beyond that. And that's because there's so much going on in our day, in our lives. And we have to learn a better mindset to how to approach the stresses in our day, in our lives, so they don't overwhelm us.
You're exactly right about that, too, because we all know them, right? And I don't know in the field if you still call them the type A personalities, the top salespeople, whatever it is. When you break it down and you actually talk to them, hey, what makes you tick? Why do you have peak performance? They say, because I was scared, because I was stressed. I had a rent payment to make. I had a car. I have 2 kids. That's stress. At some level, maybe they didn't handle it too well, but at some level, a personality like that is able, in a basic kind of way, not as advanced as what you're talking about, turn that into performance. It's really, are they in the sweet spot that you're talking about?
No. Very few of them are in the sweet spot. Most of them ignore the signs that they're having too much stress. Mm-hmm. They ignore that it takes them longer to fall asleep. They ignore that they get the headaches or more easily distracted, because in fact, the more stress we have, the less effective our brains operate.
Right.
But we get fooled. We get fooled because of that connection that I mentioned earlier. And so the first step really is having the mindset of looking for your stress sweet spot. The first step is recognizing that we have to put the 2 branches of our nervous system into a better place of balance. The stress activating branch and the recovery branch. When you put those into a better place of balance, not only is your health better, but you also perform better.
You know, it. I think recently here, and you hear a lot of pro athletes talk about this because they have a certain level of stress that just seems to be condensed during, the 60 minutes or the 48 minutes of a basketball game. But they also recently here really talk about, Tom Brady's big on this, talks about the importance of that recovery. And you just kind of said that buzzword right there. I think we're finally, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, getting over that stigma of just taking a little bit of time to recover, to rest up your body and your brain is stressful. We used to call that lazy. I mean, that was really damaging.
Right. So everybody has an optimal rhythm. And when I talk about a rhythm, I mean you thrust out into the world stressful experiences, goal-directed behavior, but then you have to come back inside and recover all the resources used up during that stress so that you can then thrust out again. So everybody needs to find their personal rhythm. And there's a 24-hour rhythm, but there's also an hourly rhythm. There's also a moment-by-moment rhythm. When I work with peak performing athletes, Olympic athletes, I teach them the value of simply 6 breaths done properly, where you take longer on the exhale, and on the exhale you let go. And I teach them how to use them within their actual performance, to find the moments in their actual performance where they can pause and take those breaths, because then they come back out stronger and more effective. So,
in other words, while you're not waiting until the end of the mission, not waiting until the end of the workday, the meeting, right then and there, that's something you can apply.
Right. And it's all about finding a healthy pattern. We all live through unhealthy patterns where we just push and push and push. You want to find a healthy pattern for yourself. I've found that when you do that, performance goes up as well as health going up. So we don't have to make a choice between being productive or having good health, which a lot of people think is a choice that they need to make.
Right.
They go together in optimal performance and optimal functioning.
Have you run into clients, students, just people in your personal life who will kind of push back on you a little bit in what you've developed here, and they'll just say, yeah, but I need it. I need that stress. I need it. I thrive on it. Well, sadly, we know how how that ends for most people. But what do you say when they come back with that? Because, I mean, bottom line is a lot of people have had success with that kind of stress. What do you say to them?
Well, there's a gray area here, because there may be some times where you can push yourself, and then you use that as a example of how you could do it all the time.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that. So sometimes you could push harder, but it still takes a toll. And so if you continue to push harder, it's going to take a bigger toll. And what I say to people who tell me exactly that, I say, you've done as well as you've done despite your pattern. If you found this balance that I'm talking about, you can do even better. And I find that to be true. I work with executives, I work with elite athletes, and they've all learned this lesson, that when you find that place of balance, you have a better grounding from which to thrust out into the world.
What is it that breaks through when you say that to them? What is it that finally clicks with them? It's got to be something related to, I could do even better.
Well, it's interesting. With some people, it's what you just said. If they hear, I could do even better, they're going to go for it. They're going to try it. But then there are other people who find it more difficult to break the old pattern. And the only time that they begin to listen is when the signals of their body's breakdown get so loud they can't ignore it.
Yeah, and that's That's the part of it that everybody will talk about without, having found your information, without having find an answer. We all know about the symptoms. I mean, they've been around for years. Headaches, as you mentioned there, just the heart problems. They call, heart disease the silent killer. But what gets to that silent killer? It's exactly what you're talking about here. Nobody ever gets to the root cause of what's actually here. And do you run into a lot of people who don't think before they found you, they didn't think there was any answer to it. They just said, well, it's like, this is my life. And as I get older and I'm busier and I'm more successful, this is just the way it is. That's got to be a challenge for you to get over people who have that mindset.
Well, absolutely, because a lot of people feel like stress is just part of the territory.
Yeah, we're
I
used
want
to
to
it.
be successful. I have to do it this way.
Yep.
And it's only when they engage in a process, and this is the whole basis of my book, The 9 Pillars, because it takes people step by step through getting better at each of these 9 pillars. And what most people say to me is, I've gotten my life back. What most people say to me is, not only do they feel better, but they're performing better. Because a lot of times we don't realize that when we exhaust ourselves, when we're tired, that our brains literally don't focus as well. It's more difficult to concentrate. It's
Right.
more difficult to problem solve. But sometimes it's difficult to realize that until you try it, doing it a different way.
It's amazing you say that too, because I just recently had my life changes. Just instead of doing commercial corporate radio, getting up at 3:30 in the morning every day for literally, I did it for 30 years, and thought I was fine, and walked away from that, started something new, other businesses, still thinking it was the same thing. Recently, what's come to me is the realization of how bad that was. But we do adjust. We're tough. We're resilient people in general. But maybe the danger is in getting used to that, and accepting that somehow and not doing it. Because I will tell you, it's just now, it's like I'm remembering things now, and I'm like 6 months away from that world. I'm remembering things I haven't remembered in years. Obviously, I'm sleeping better. That'll happen when you don't get up at 3 o'clock, 3:30 in the morning. But just better at everything. And I think if I hadn't made that change, I wouldn't be realizing this.
Right. And your comment about how we adapt is spot on. So right now, everybody in the audience, check in with your jaw, check in with your shoulders, and notice your breath. You might have a shallow breath, or you may even be holding your breath. You may have elevated tension in your shoulders. And this is because exactly what you said, we adapt to higher and higher levels of tension. It becomes our norm, even though our shoulders are tense, our jaws are tense, our stomach is tight. And so we have to give some time, some pause to check in and to recalibrate into this place of balance that I'm talking about, instead of the activated level that we continually live in. Now, some people begin to notice it because they have difficulty falling asleep.
Right.
This probably is the biggest problem in our society right now. Difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep. And the reason is that if you think about your day, we're continually activating to stresses because there's stimuli all throughout our day that signal danger, signal uncertainty.
Sure.
Right? And it may not even be something that's going on right now, but it may occur to us, how am I going to pay this bill tomorrow? And that triggers a stress response. But Bill, how many stimuli in your day tell you it's safe, you're safe, you can let down your guard?
Oh boy. I mean, more now, but generally there's hardly any. A handful.
Right.
A handful would be a great day.
Yeah, exactly. So we keep ramping up our tension without any recovery, and this throws off our nervous system to what I call autonomic dysregulation syndrome, which is at the heart of body's inflammation and at the heart of the speeding up of the aging process and disease formation. So we need to have a mindset that we want to find the stress sweet spot. And the other thing that I say is I've redefined resilience. I don't resilience we talk about as the ability to bounce back.
Mm-hmm.
But you don't want to bounce back to where you were, to where and do continue to do things in the old way that you've done in the past.
Sure.
So resilience, my new definition is the ability to bounce forward, where every time you're challenged, every time you engage in some stressful behavior, you look for the lesson to learn. You look for what you could do differently, better, that works better. And so the next time you engage in a stressful behavior, you're coming from this new, more effective approach.
And it's like, we always talk about muscle memory, right? It's probably the same thing. So the more you practice, let's say they just got out of a talk with you and you're in a stressful as hell business meeting, but you're using that breathing technique. And the one time it clicks through and you say, hey, that kind of worked. I'm okay. You know what? I think I'm sharper. You do it again and again. You have that confidence, don't you? That you can get through any stressful situation like that once you realize it worked at least once?
Yes, it's very true. But to really break away to a new level of resilience, everybody needs to start paying attention to their old patterns. The lessons learned in childhood that guide our behavior as adults. Because those patterns are based on lessons that may not be the best lessons. They're based
Sure.
on messages that you got from parents who may not have known any better, but gave you messages that you're not okay, you're not good enough, you're not as good as Joe next door. All these kinds of messages that guide our behavior as adults. And
It,
so
it,
I,
that's exact. You know what? I'm sorry, but you just hit on something that is so key, I think, because doesn't a lot of this come from keeping up with the Joneses kind of guilt? Or how about this? You saw your dad work himself to death. I must be lazy if I'm not taking the same approach. Isn't that another way of saying that?
absolutely, you're exactly right. And so my first pillar of resilience is your relationship with yourself. And it starts there. And so people in the audience can start looking to see how and notice how they treat themselves. Are they critical or accepting? Are they judgmental? Are you hard on yourself when you make a mistake? That's the old pattern.
Yeah.
The healthy pattern is when you develop inside a voice, your own internal parent that comes from a place of love, acceptance, commitment, support, caring, and joy. Those are the qualities, those are the hallmarks of a healthy internal voice. So every time that you start to be hard on yourself, critical, judgmental, you want to stop and say to yourself, this doesn't serve me. And then you shift into coming from a place of, as I just described, those qualities. That's the primary shift that results in great resilience.
I love that you said the internal voice too, because I can't remember what it was. It was sometime late last year. Somebody did a study, and I couldn't quote you, but they asked a bunch of Gen Zers, young kids, even like college age and younger, what's your internal voice like? Is it third person? Is it first person? Do you have, and they were, I guess the researchers were horrified to find out that they had no idea what an internal voice was. And they were just like, well, what do you mean? That scared me too, because that means you're just reacting to external factors constantly, I think. Is that what that means? I think it's scary as hell if people don't have that internal voice.
Right. So what that means is rather than your reference point being here,
Yeah.
most people's reference point is out there. And
Right.
that's why we're swayed so amazingly by messages that we hear from influencers and
Yeah.
politicians who don't necessarily have your best interests at heart.
Well, absolutely. That's right. And, people affected by that, or the people I talked about in our intro here and our reason for talking about stress in the first place. I wanted to talk about moms specifically because I think if I was to think of a certain type of person or a demographic or however you want to call it, that I think is the most stressed out, I really, just from my eyes, I see it as moms because I just see it every day. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's because they're trying to be all things to all people and taking on more responsibility, but trying to live up to some kind of a standard. Is that the reason why we see that so much among moms?
Absolutely. And for everybody, one of the biggest sources of stress is just all the things that need to be done, how long the to-do list is,
Yeah.
right? And it's endless. And mothers have this in spades because particularly if they're working, they have that whole arena, and then they have the whole family,
Oh, yeah.
children. And so they start the day looking at all that needs to be done. And before they even start off, they're stressed. And so one of the keys, and this is for everybody, but particularly for moms, is that you want to make a schedule for yourself as realistically as possible and try and stick to that schedule as much as you can so that when it's 9 o'clock, instead of looking at all the things that need to be done and thinking, oh, I have this to do and this to do, all you're thinking about is what you need to do between 9 and 10. And then at 10 o'clock, only thinking about what you need to do between 10 and 11. And this is difficult for most people because they'll start to do what they're doing at 9 o'clock, and already they're thinking of what needs to happen at 3 and 4 and 5.
Sure.
But that doesn't make you any more productive. It doesn't help you get things done any faster or any better. All it does is stress you out. And so that's one of the real ways to become more resilient and deal with stress is to block out everything else and just focus on what you're doing right here and now. Being present, staying in the moment, and enjoying what you're doing rather than feeling stressed because there's so many other things not getting done right now. You can't do all things at once. You can only do one thing at a time. And if you decide that that's true, it can reduce a lot of your stress because time pressure is one of the biggest sources of stress.
And I love that you said that too. It's about, enjoying now. We only have a limited number of days. I know that's kind of a dark way to say that, but it's absolutely true. If you don't live in the moment somehow, some way, and find that sweet spot you're talking about, what's it all for?
Right, but the key is that the messages I'm giving right now and what we're talking about, it's not like going over to the wall and flipping a light switch. You don't just hear what I'm saying and get it. You have to keep practicing it. And every time the other voice that says, what about this, what about that comes in, you go, stop, no, this isn't helpful. I have to focus on what I'm doing right here and now. Every time you stop and come back to the present, you're literally rewiring your brain into a new, healthier pattern. At the same time, every time you give into the old pattern and start looking at all these other things, you're reinforcing the old neural network. And every moment in our lives, we have this choice. Continue in the old pattern, the old way, and keep reinforcing the old neural network, or stop and do it the healthier way and engage new neural patterns. This conversation you and I are having, if it's impactful to the people in your audience, literally this half-hour conversation is sprouting new projections out of our neurons.
I hope so.
Right here, right now. That's called neuroplasticity. And it's available to all of us. But we have to have the right mindset. We have to stop ourselves in the moment, realize we have choice, and go in the right direction.
As we kind of wrap up here, I was wondering before I got a chance to actually talk to you about who this would apply to. And very quickly the answer came to me. Literally everybody. And what I mean by that is, my hope is we get to the point where we can actually teach those young brains as soon as we can these same skills. What if, we're playing a lot of what if today, I understand that, but what if we were able to teach these kinds of skills and this kind of mindset to kids? Can you imagine how productive, how beneficial to other people, to society, to themselves, their families, whatever it is, if they use these same principles? It's not beyond them to understand it. In fact, they're probably better at it than we are, but it's up to us to try to instill this kind of stuff. I guess that starts with parents. I don't know if we're going to be able to get into schools, but the information's out there.
Right. And so I teach parents how to raise resilient children.
Good. Oh, good. I didn't even know you did that.
Based on my 9 pillars of resilience, that is the first step. The next step is getting it into schools, teaching these lessons in schools.
Absolutely. We can do it someday. It's just up to us to get it done. And what I love that you did several times today is talk about that key word that it's become my favorite word of all time is mindset. It's everything. It's literally everything. How you react and how you turn something that's happening to you in the outside world around and actually turn it into a positive, which is why I love your stuff. It's right. The Dr. Steven Sideroff, the 9 pillars of resilience. You got to pick it up. It's the proven path to mastering stress, slow aging, which is incredibly important these days as well, and increased vitality. I know that you're everywhere online, but probably the easiest place to find you is drstevensideroff.com. Do I have that right?
You have that right. And for everybody listening, there is a very easy first step, and that's to learn where you stand. And if you go to my website, or I'll give you the direct link for a free gift for my resilience assessment booklet. And in that is a questionnaire people can take, self-score, and derive their personal resilience profile along my 9 dimensions, my 9 pillars. And that's a great first step.
It's a great first step, and it's maybe one of the most important steps because you got to do that self-assessment, because otherwise we're caught in the treadmill, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic stuff. I appreciate your time so much. I wanted to talk to you for quite some time. You surpassed even my expectations, Dr. Sideroff. Thank you so much for that.
Wonderful, Bill. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And by the way, the book, where do you find that? I think the next word that's going to come out of your mouth is Amazon, but where else can we find the 9 pillars?
It's in bookstores everywhere, as well as Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
Wonderful stuff. If you don't mind, I'm going to put you in my stable of awesome guests, because that means I'm going to be calling you again sometime if you have time. Is that okay?
Yes, sounds good, Bill.
All right. Thank you so much again for your time,
Thank you,
Dr. Steven Sideroff. Thank you again. And thanks for finding out what all of this stuff is all about. And it's all about mindset. That's my main takeaway on this. Great, great stuff. So glad we got a chance to talk to him. Make sure that you follow and share along. If you lasted this long in the interview, you've already improved your life, like Dr. Sideroff just said. Follow the YouTube channel. You can find Wicked Wisdom with me, Bill Adams, on all of these channels everywhere. YouTube, Facebook, it's on X. And don't forget, the daily live stream is called Wicked Radio with Bill Adams. So use that. It's about mindset. Have a great, especially you moms. Happy Mother's Day.